Picture yourself in the frozen wilderness of Alaska. The air is sharp, your breath turns to mist, and the horizon stretches endlessly with snow and pine. Rising from this lonely landscape are rows upon rows of antennas, standing like metallic soldiers, pointing skyward. To an outsider, it might look like a farm for radio towers or some abandoned military base. But this place is the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HAARP. HAARP was born in the early 1990s, during a time of rapid scientific growth and lingering Cold War anxieties. Officially, it was created as a joint effort by the U.S. Air Force, the Navy, and DARPA, with scientific partnership from the University of Alaska. The stated goal was simple enough: study the ionosphere, the electrically charged layer of the Earth's atmosphere that sits high above our heads. This region plays a critical role in radio communication, GPS navigation, and even missile detection systems. By sending powerful high-frequency radio waves into the ionosphere, scientists hope to learn how it behaves, how signals travel through it, and how it might be used to improve communication with submarines deep under the ocean. On paper, this was nothing more than an advanced research laboratory, a giant science experiment to better understand our planet. But there's a detail that made people uneasy: the sheer scale of the facility. HAARP consisted of 180 massive antennas, spread across 30 acres, capable of transmitting up to 3.6 million watts of power into the sky. For comparison, that's enough energy to light up thousands of homes. To many, it seemed like overkill for a research project. Why did they need that much power just to poke at the atmosphere? From day one, HAARP carried the fingerprints of the military. Its funding, its secrecy, and its location all raised questions. Why Alaska, so remote and so hidden from the public eye? Why the heavy presence of defense agencies? If it was just about science, why wasn't it built closer to universities or scientific hubs? These questions lingered, and suspicion grew. The early 1990s was also a time when conspiracy culture was exploding. Shows like The X-Files told audiences to trust no one. Rumors about Area 51, UFOs, and secret government projects filled late-night radio and early internet chat rooms. Into this fertile soil of distrust, HAARP was planted, and it didn't take long for stories to sprout. For the people living near Gakona, Alaska, where HAARP was built, strange experiences began to feed those stories. The sky sometimes glowed with unusually bright auroras. Radio signals were occasionally interrupted with odd noises. Locals whispered that something unnatural was happening just over the hill. And when officials offered reassurances, "It's just science, nothing to worry about," many didn't believe them. Part of the problem was HAARP's openness was selective. While it did host scientific conferences and eventually offered occasional tours, much of its research remained technical, inaccessible, and cloaked in military jargon. For the average citizen, that only fueled suspicion. If it's so harmless, people wondered, why all the secrecy? In reality, HAARP was the product of overlapping motivations. For scientists, it was an opportunity to study the upper atmosphere in ways never before possible. For the military, it was a tool to test communication technologies and explore possibilities that might give the US an edge in defense. For conspiracy theorists, though, it was the perfect stage. A massive, remote, and mysterious facility with enough power to sound like a machine straight out of science fiction. So, in the snow-covered fields of Alaska, two parallel stories began. One was grounded in science, experimentation, and curiosity. The other was wrapped in fear, imagination, and distrust of authority. And both would come to define how HAARP was seen, as either a laboratory of discovery or the seed of a modern-day doomsday machine. This is where our journey starts, with a forest of antennas, a cloak of secrecy, and a public eager to believe that hidden deep in Alaska, mankind had unlocked a dangerous new power. When HAARP first came to life, most people didn't pay much attention. It was just another government project in a faraway place. But curiosity has a way of spreading, and soon, HAARP became a magnet for stories that were far more exciting and frightening than anything written in its scientific proposals. In the mid-1990s, conspiracy theories were exploding. The Cold War had ended, but suspicion of government power was at an all-time high. The internet was just beginning to connect ordinary people, while late-night radio shows like Coast to Coast AM gave a stage to wild and controversial ideas. Against this backdrop, HAARP's giant antennas seemed almost too perfect to ignore. Here was a facility that could beam millions of watts into the sky, with military funding, built in a place few people would ever visit. To believers, the official explanation, "We're studying the ionosphere," felt thin. They began to imagine darker possibilities. What if HAARP wasn't about studying the sky at all? What if it was about controlling it? One of the earliest and most popular theories was weather control. People claimed HAARP could steer hurricanes, weaken or intensify storms, and even cause droughts or floods. If farmers in one region suffered a sudden dry season, whispers began, "That's HAARP." When a hurricane shifted unexpectedly and devastated a coastline, some pointed north to Alaska, convinced that those antennas were to blame. The theories grew bolder. Some claimed HAARP could cause earthquakes by sending energy deep into the earth, disrupting tectonic plates. Whenever a tragedy struck, the Haiti earthquake in 2010, the massive tsunami in Japan the following year, online forums filled with accusations that HAARP was behind it. "Look at the timing," they said. "Look at the power. This can't just be nature." Others imagined an even stranger possibility: mind control. If HAARP could influence the ionosphere, perhaps it could also generate frequencies that interfered with human brainwaves. Rumors spread that governments could use HAARP to pacify entire populations, sow confusion, or even trigger violence when convenient. The idea blended perfectly with rising fears of surveillance and loss of privacy. These stories didn't stay on the fringes. They bled into pop culture. Documentaries, YouTube videos, and paperback books declared HAARP to be the doomsday machine of our age. Movies hinted at secret weather weapons. Television shows worked it into their plots. Every reference gave the myths more strength, until for many, HAARP became less a research station and more a symbol of hidden power. Why were people so ready to believe? Part of the answer lies in human psychology. Natural disasters are terrifying. They strike suddenly, destroy lives, and leave people searching for meaning. Accepting that a hurricane or earthquake is just random chance can feel unbearable. Believing that someone, anyone, is controlling it offers a strange kind of comfort. If disasters are man-made, then maybe they can be stopped. Maybe there's someone to blame. There's also the simple fact that governments and militaries don't have spotless records when it comes to secrecy. History is filled with real examples of experiments kept hidden from the public. Nuclear testing, chemical trials, surveillance programs. Against that backdrop, is it any wonder people looked at HAARP and thought, what aren't they telling us? The media played its part too. Sensational headlines attract attention, and HAARP's blend of science and mystery was irresistible. The image of massive antennas blasting invisible waves into the sky was powerful. It looked like the stuff of science fiction. And science fiction has always walked the fine line between wonder and fear. So HAARP became a story bigger than itself. It wasn't just about antennas or the ionosphere anymore. It was about trust, fear, and imagination. For some, it symbolized scientific curiosity, pushing the limits of what we know about the planet. For others, it was the ultimate tool of control, a machine that could bend nature and humanity to its will. This dual identity, part laboratory, part legend, is what has kept HAARP alive in the public imagination long after many other research projects were forgotten. Whether you believe the conspiracies or not, it's clear that HAARP has become more than metal towers in Alaska. It has become a mirror, reflecting our deepest anxieties about power, secrecy, and the fragile balance between humanity and the forces of nature. If we're going to understand HAARP, we need to step back from the rumors for a moment and look at what the technology actually does. Strip away the mystery, the military logos, the online whispers, and you'll find that HAARP is essentially a giant scientific tool designed to study the ionosphere. But how does it work? And how does something so ordinary-looking end up inspiring ideas of a doomsday machine? The ionosphere is a region of Earth's upper atmosphere, stretching from about 30 miles to 600 miles above us. It's filled with charged particles, or ions, created by the sun's radiation. These particles make the ionosphere a natural mirror for radio waves, allowing them to bounce long distances around the globe. That's why AM radio can travel so far at night. The signals reflect off this charged layer. But the ionosphere isn't stable. It shifts with solar storms, day and night cycles, and even seasonal changes. For scientists and the military alike, understanding it is vital. HAARP's role was to act like a flashlight in the dark. Its antennas transmitted high-frequency radio waves upward, briefly energizing a tiny portion of the ionosphere. This patch would heat up, creating ripples and reactions that researchers could measure. By studying these effects, they could learn how signals travel, how interference happens, and how the ionosphere might be harnessed for better communication systems. On paper, it sounds harmless. The heated area was only a few miles across, and the energy, while massive by human standards, was minuscule compared to the natural forces already at work in the atmosphere. A single lightning bolt, for example, carries far more energy than HAARP could ever beam upward in one shot. To most scientists, the idea that HAARP could steer a hurricane or trigger an earthquake is laughable. The scale just doesn't compare. Yet the physics, while straightforward to researchers, can sound intimidating to outsiders. Words like ionospheric heating, plasma physics, and high-frequency radiation don't exactly roll off the tongue. Add the fact that HAARP's experiments sometimes produced eerie visual effects, shimmering lights in the sky, unusual radio interference, and you can see why suspicions grew. To the untrained eye, it looked like they were tampering with nature itself. So what could HAARP realistically do? It could help test over-the-horizon radar systems, which rely on bouncing signals off the ionosphere. It could improve submarine communication, which is notoriously difficult since radio waves don't travel well through seawater. It also allowed scientists to better understand space weather, the storms of charged particles from the sun that can knock out satellites or power grids. In short, HAARP was part of a broader effort to safeguard technology and defense systems in an increasingly interconnected world. Still, the line between possibility and speculation is thin. Could ionospheric research someday lead to technologies that influence weather? Perhaps indirectly. If you understand how the ionosphere behaves, you might learn ways to enhance or disrupt certain systems. That sliver of possibility, combined with the military involvement, is enough to fuel endless what-ifs. Think about it this way. When you hear that a facility can beam millions of watts into the sky, run by the military, and cause strange lights above the Earth, what conclusion do you jump to? If you're scientifically trained, you see a valuable lab. If you're suspicious of authority, you see the beginnings of a weather control weapon. Both interpretations grow from the same root, the undeniable strangeness of the science itself. That's the challenge with HAARP. Its real work is fascinating, but complicated. For many people, the science feels inaccessible, wrapped in jargon and hidden in papers that only specialists can read. Into that gap, conspiracy theories rush, offering simpler, If scarier, explanations. Their controlling the weather is easier to grasp than their studying plasma irregularities in the ionosphere. Fear fills the void where understanding should be. And so, HAARP's physics became both its defense and its curse. On one hand, the science shows the limits of what it can do. On the other, the same science, cloaked in complexity, makes it sound like anything might be possible. In the end, the truth about HAARP lies in the numbers. Its power, though impressive, is dwarfed by the forces of nature. But the perception that maybe, just maybe, humans have built a machine capable of reaching into the sky and tugging at the strings of nature remains far harder to dispel. When disaster strikes, people search for explanations. Sometimes those explanations are scientific, tectonic plates shifting, storms fueled by warm oceans, or seasonal rainfall patterns. But sometimes, explanations take a darker turn. In the case of HAARP, every major catastrophe seemed to become a new piece of evidence in the court of public opinion. To believers, this facility in Alaska wasn't just poking at the sky, it was pulling the strings of global disaster. Let's start with one of the biggest claims: earthquakes. In January 2010, a devastating quake struck Haiti, killing more than 200,000 people and leveling entire neighborhoods. In the days that followed, as aid workers rushed in and survivors struggled to make sense of what had happened, a theory spread online. Some claimed the earthquake wasn't natural at all, that HAARP had triggered it. YouTube videos appeared, pointing to odd lights seen in the sky before the quake as supposed proof. In truth, scientists later explained those lights as earthquake-related plasma phenomena, a known but rare effect. But once the HAARP theory took root, it spread faster than the facts. A year later, Japan was shaken by one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded, followed by a massive tsunami that left unimaginable destruction in its wake. Again, the whispers began, this wasn't nature. This was HAARP. People online shared screenshots of HAARP's activity logs, claiming spikes in radio transmissions lined up with the disaster. Scientists, however, noted that the energy required to move tectonic plates dwarfed anything HAARP could produce. The math simply didn't add up. Yet to those already convinced, denial from experts was seen as part of the cover-up. Storms, too, became tied to HAARP's name. When Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans in 2005, or when superstorms battered the Philippines and other coastal nations, HAARP was accused of steering them. Believers argued that by heating the ionosphere, HAARP could redirect jet streams or manipulate pressure systems, effectively guiding storms where they wanted them to go. It was a chilling idea that weather itself might be weaponized. The problem, of course, is that the atmosphere is so vast and chaotic that even the most advanced technologies struggle to predict it, let alone control it. But in the conspiracy mindset, HAARP's very existence was enough to make the theory plausible. Even smaller-scale disasters didn't escape suspicion. A sudden flood in Europe? HAARP. A heat wave in Australia? HAARP. A mysterious blackout in South America? HAARP. The facility became a kind of universal scapegoat, a catch-all explanation whenever tragedy struck. Each new event added another brick to the wall of belief, no matter how weak the evidence. Why do these theories persist despite scientific pushback? Partly, it's timing. People notice coincidences. A HAARP experiment runs, and soon after, a natural event occurs somewhere in the world. To a scientist, this is meaningless correlation. The Earth has constant seismic and atmospheric activity. But to someone already suspicious, it feels like a smoking gun. There's also the emotional weight of disaster. When lives are lost, communities are destroyed, and governments seem powerless, people want answers. If nature is random and uncontrollable, then no one is to blame. But if HAARP caused it, then someone is responsible. It transforms chaos into conspiracy, and conspiracy is easier for many to process than chaos. Of course, there's a deeper irony here. HAARP itself was often shut down for long stretches of time, sometimes years. Yet during those same periods, disasters still happened, just as they always have. Earthquakes rattled cities, storms battered coastlines, and floods swept through valleys, all without a single watt of HAARP energy being transmitted. But in the world of conspiracy, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. To believers, HAARP's inactivity was simply proof it was being covered up. Looking at these claims through a critical lens doesn't mean dismissing people's fears. Disasters are traumatic, and when official explanations feel cold or incomplete, suspicion fills the gap. What HAARP represents in these moments isn't just antennas and transmitters. It's a symbol of hidden power, of the idea that someone, somewhere, might be controlling our fate. Whether or not it's true almost doesn't matter. The story itself is powerful enough to survive. So each earthquake, each hurricane, each flood adds fuel to the fire of belief. And HAARP, buried in the Alaskan wilderness, continues to carry the weight of disasters that may have nothing to do with it at all, but everything to do with our need for answers. For every official explanation about HAARP, there has always been a shadow of doubt. People don't just want to hear what the government says, they want proof. And when documents surface, whether declassified or leaked, they become fuel for both sides of the debate. The scientists who say this is ordinary research, and the skeptics who ask, what are they hiding? Let's start with what we know. Over the years, several documents about HAARP have been made public. Some were released through routine declassification, others through Freedom of Information Act requests. These papers confirm many of the official goals: studying the ionosphere, improving communication systems, testing over-the-horizon radar, and researching how solar storms affect our technology. On the surface, these reports read like technical manuals, dry, filled with charts, equations, and engineering jargon. Nothing in them screams Doomsday machine. But sometimes, it isn't what's on the page that captures attention, it's what's missing. Many documents are heavily redacted. Entire paragraphs blacked out, diagrams blurred, technical details withheld. To a researcher, this might be normal procedure, protecting sensitive data or national security secrets. To a skeptic, it's a smoking gun. If it's harmless, they argue, why hide so much? Then there are the reports that use language ripe for interpretation. Words like ionospheric modification or geophysical applications can sound harmless to scientists but ominous to outsiders. Modification of the ionosphere? That sounds like tampering with the sky itself. Geophysical applications? That could mean anything from weather experiments to tectonic disruption. Without context, these phrases take on a life of their own. Beyond official releases, there have been leaks, or at least, claims of leaks. Documents circulated online, sometimes authentic, sometimes unverifiable, suggesting experiments with global implications. One paper claimed HAARP could influence climate engineering. Another hinted at military interest in disrupting enemy communications through atmospheric manipulation. While these aren't the same as steering hurricanes or triggering earthquakes, the language was enough to make people wonder. If the military was even considering these applications, what else might they be hiding? The most controversial piece of evidence often cited is a US patent from the 1980s, long before HAARP was built. This patent, filed by scientist Bernard Eastlund, describes a system strikingly similar to HAARP's antenna array. In the document, Eastlund speculated about possible applications: weather modification, missile defense, even disrupting aircraft. Though HAARP officials insist the facility never had such capabilities, conspiracy theorists point to this patent as proof of intent. They thought about it, they argue, so of course they built it. To complicate things further, HAARP wasn't unique. Other nations had similar research programs. Russia experimented with powerful transmitters, and China invested in atmospheric research. Global interest in ionospheric studies makes sense scientifically, but in the conspiracy world, it suggested something bigger, a hidden arms race, with weather and geophysics as the new battlegrounds. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. Governments do explore exotic technologies, sometimes far beyond what the public imagines. Not every experiment makes the evening news. At the same time, secrecy doesn't always mean conspiracy. Sometimes it just means protecting intellectual property or maintaining a strategic advantage. But when disasters strike and trust in authority is low, every redacted line becomes suspicious, every vague phrase becomes sinister. What makes HAARP so enduring as a subject of speculation is that the documents themselves don't end the debate. They fuel it. Each release answers one question but raises three more. Each blackout of text leaves room for imagination. In the absence of total transparency, the human mind fills in the gaps with fear, suspicion, and sometimes, wild creativity. For the scientists who worked at HAARP, these conspiracy theories can feel frustrating. They see a research project that published peer-reviewed papers, collaborated with universities, and even offered occasional public tours. But for those on the outside looking in, the image is very different. Locked gates, military funding, and stacks of censored documents. One picture says science. The other says secrets. And that's the paradox of HAARP. The more information that comes out, the more questions it seems to raise. Not because the science is sinister, but because the language of science, technical, cautious, and incomplete, leaves wide open spaces for doubt. In those spaces, imagination thrives. And once a story takes root, no amount of documentation can fully erase it. When people talk about HAARP, they often focus only on Alaska. But the truth is, the idea of manipulating the environment, whether for science or for power, is not uniquely American. Around the world, other nations have dabbled with similar experiments, raising an unsettling question. Is weather control the next frontier in global competition? Let's take a step back. The idea of using weather as a weapon isn't new. During the Vietnam War, the US military launched a secret program called Operation Popeye. Its goal was to seed clouds with chemicals to extend the monsoon season over enemy supply routes. The result? Roads turned to mud, supply chains were disrupted, and the seeds of weather warfare were planted, literally. That was the 1960s and 70s. Decades later, HAARP seemed like a far more advanced tool in the same direction. Other nations have their own histories. The Soviet Union, for example, built powerful radio transmitters, often nicknamed the Russian woodpecker, because of the tapping sound they made on shortwave radios worldwide. While officially tied to radar and communication, many suspected hidden research into atmospheric manipulation. More recently, China has openly pursued weather modification. The country has invested billions in cloud seeding to control rainfall, even claiming to clear skies for events like the 2008 Beijing Olympics. If the skies themselves can be shaped, even slightly, the strategic possibilities are enormous. These efforts sparked international concern, leading to the 1977 NMOD Convention, a treaty banning the use of environmental modification for hostile purposes. Nations agreed not to trigger earthquakes, tsunamis, or deliberately alter the climate as weapons of war. On paper, this treaty was a safeguard. But treaties only matter if countries follow them. And when technology is shrouded in secrecy, who can say where the line is truly drawn? This global context makes HAARP's story even more complicated. Was it really just a research station, or was it part of a quiet arms race? To believers, the pattern is obvious. If cloud seeding was used in war, if superpowers built massive transmitters, and if treaties had to be signed to prevent weather warfare, then surely HAARP was more than science. To skeptics, however, this logic stretches too far. Just because weather has been explored as a weapon doesn't mean every facility is built for that purpose. Still, the potential is hard to ignore. Imagine a weapon that doesn't fire bullets or missiles, but instead summons a drought, floods a city, or redirects a hurricane. No explosions, no fingerprints, just devastation disguised as nature. It's a terrifying idea, and one that seems almost tailor-made for secrecy. After all, who could prove that a storm wasn't natural? The problem, once again, is scale. Natural systems are so vast and chaotic that nudging them in a controlled way is nearly impossible with current technology. Cloud seeding can encourage rain, but it can't guarantee it. Large-scale storm steering remains firmly in the realm of speculation. HAARP's power, impressive as it sounds, pales in comparison to the energy contained in a thunderstorm, let alone a typhoon. Yet when governments pour millions into mysterious facilities, the imagination doesn't care about the math. The geopolitical stakes are clear. If even a fraction of environmental manipulation is possible, it could change the balance of power. Farmers could be forced into famine, cities into ruin, nations into collapse, all without a single shot fired. That's why the idea of weather as a weapon lingers so powerfully in the public mind. It represents ultimate control over both nature and people. HAARP, sitting quietly in Alaska, became the symbol of this fear. Whether or not it ever had such capabilities, it stood as proof that humanity was willing to try. And with other nations openly experimenting, the line between science and strategy blurred further. Every new weather disaster became a stage for suspicion. Was this nature, or was this war by other means? In the end, what we see in HAARP is not just antennas and transmitters, but a reflection of a larger truth. Humans have always sought to bend nature to their will. From rain dances to cloud seeding, from treaties to transmitters, the dream and the nightmare of weather control is deeply woven into our history. HAARP may not be the doomsday machine its critics fear, but it sits within a story much bigger than itself, the global pursuit of power through the very forces of the earth. For every claim that HAARP is a doomsday machine, there is a scientist ready to push back. And not quietly. Over the years, physicists, engineers, and atmospheric researchers have repeatedly tried to set the record straight. To them, the conspiracies are more than just wrong. They are an insult to the science they dedicated their lives to. Let's start with the most common point: energy. HAARP's transmitters, at maximum, could pump 3.6 million watts into the ionosphere. That might sound enormous, but nature laughs at those numbers. A single lightning bolt carries around 1 billion watts of power, hundreds of times stronger than HAARP's entire system. A thunderstorm? It generates more energy than HAARP could ever dream of. And an earthquake? The energy released in just a small quake is millions of times greater than anything HAARP could beam into the earth. In other words, the math doesn't add up. No matter how powerful HAARP looks, it's a toy compared to the forces of nature. Then there's the science itself. HAARP didn't create storms or shake the ground. It heated up tiny patches of the ionosphere, usually just a few miles across. Researchers measured the effects, took readings, and published their findings in peer-reviewed journals. The data wasn't hidden in vaults. Much of it was shared openly with the academic community. To scientists, this transparency is proof that HAARP wasn't a weapon. If we were building a secret superweapon, one researcher once joked, we wouldn't be inviting students and foreign scientists to come study with us. Still, debunking is harder than it looks. Part of the challenge is language. Scientific explanations often sound cold and technical. When a scientist says, the ionosphere was heated with high-frequency radio waves to study plasma irregularities, it doesn't exactly calm fears. To the average person, it sounds like they're messing with the sky. And when people are already suspicious, technical jargon feels like misdirection instead of clarity. Another challenge is history. Governments do keep secrets, sometimes for decades. From the Manhattan Project to covert surveillance programs, people have learned that official denials can't always be trusted. So when scientists say HAARP is harmless, conspiracy believers hear echoes of past cover-ups. Skepticism is baked into the conversation. Yet many researchers who worked at HAARP have gone out of their way to be open. They gave public tours, hosted open houses, and even invited journalists. They explained the experiments in plain language. We heat a patch of the ionosphere and see how it reacts. But every time they tried, the conspiracies seemed to grow louder. To believers, the tours were just for show, the explanations just part of the script. Once a story of secrecy takes hold, no amount of transparency feels like enough. The scientific community also points out that HAARP isn't unique. Dozens of facilities around the world have studied the ionosphere. Russia, Europe, and Asia all have their versions of high-frequency transmitters. None of these have been tied to controlling hurricanes or triggering earthquakes. HAARP simply became the lightning rod because it was bigger, newer, and American, and because it appeared at the perfect time, when conspiracy culture was already booming. So why keep debunking if the myths never die? For scientists, the answer is twofold. First, they believe in truth. If a machine isn't controlling the weather, people should know that. Second, myths can have real consequences. When communities believe disasters are man-made, it can distract from real solutions. Instead of preparing for climate change or improving disaster response, energy gets wasted chasing ghosts in Alaska. Still, the pushback hasn't stopped the stories. Scientists can calculate energy outputs, show the data, even let people walk among the antennas, and yet, the myth of HAARP as a doomsday device continues. In some ways, it's a battle between numbers and narrative. Numbers say HAARP is too weak to bend nature. Narrative says it's a shadowy machine with untold power. And history shows that narrative often wins in the court of public imagination. In the end, the debunkers aren't trying to kill the mystery. They're trying to remind us of scale, of perspective, of the difference between what science can and cannot do. But as long as HAARP remains standing, as long as disasters continue to strike, the myths will live on. Because when fear meets mystery, facts alone are rarely enough to close the case. Why do stories about HAARP stick in people's minds? Why does the idea of a machine that can bend nature sound more believable to some than scientific facts? The answers lie not in antennas or transmitters, but in psychology and society. At its core, HAARP isn't just a scientific project or a conspiracy theory. It's a story, one that taps into human fears, suspicions, and the deep need to explain the unexplainable. First, there's the simple fact of mystery. Most people don't know how the ionosphere works. They've never seen plasma physics up close. When science feels distant and unfamiliar, it becomes fertile ground for speculation. A strange-looking array of antennas in the middle of Alaska, guarded and fenced, is the perfect canvas for imagination. People fill in the gaps with whatever feels most likely to them, or most frightening. Then there's the role of fear. Natural disasters are terrifying because they remind us how small we are. Hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis. They strike without warning and leave chaos behind. It's easier, in some ways, to believe that disasters are controlled by humans than to accept that they are random acts of nature. If someone is pulling the strings, then at least there's a reason, a villain, a way to point the finger. Randomness is scarier than conspiracy. Distrust of authority plays a big role. 2. History has shown that governments and militaries sometimes do lie, sometimes do keep secrets, and sometimes do experiment with technology that shocks the public years later. This track record makes people suspicious by default. So when officials say, "Don't worry, HAARP is harmless," it doesn't land as reassurance, it lands as denial. Suspicion becomes the lens through which everything is viewed. There's also a social element. Conspiracies like HAARP thrive in communities, both offline and online. In the past, these conversations took place in small circles, whispered theories, late-night radio shows, niche newsletters. But with the rise of the internet, HAARP exploded into global consciousness. YouTube videos, forums, and social media posts amplified the story. Each photograph of antennas, each clip of a thunderstorm, each blurry leaked document became evidence to share, debate, and build upon. The community gave the story life, and once a story has a community, it becomes nearly impossible to kill. For some, HAARP theories even provide comfort. Believing disasters are caused by a machine in Alaska is strangely less frightening than facing climate change, rising sea levels, or the unpredictability of the Earth itself. Machines can be turned off. Governments can be pressured. But a planet changing on its own? That feels hopeless. Conspiracies, for all their darkness, sometimes offer a strange kind of hope. There's also the thrill factor. The idea of hidden technology and secret experiments is exciting. It makes the world feel bigger, more mysterious, less ordinary. Walking past antennas might not sound dramatic, but imagining them as tools of world control? That's cinematic. It taps into the same human curiosity that draws us to spy thrillers, science fiction, and ancient mysteries. HAARP becomes more than a facility, it becomes a stage for imagination. Psychologists who study conspiracy theories often point to 3 drivers: the need for understanding, the need for control, and the need for belonging. HAARP checks all 3 boxes. It explains disasters, gives people someone to blame, and connects them with a community of others who see through the lies. Once those needs are met, facts and figures struggle to compete. But the impact isn't only personal. On a larger scale, HAARP has become a symbol in debates about trust, transparency, and the relationship between science and the public. It shows how quickly scientific projects can be reinterpreted as threats, and how easily official explanations can be drowned out by speculation. In some ways, HAARP is less about antennas and more about us, our fears, our doubts, and our hunger for meaning in a chaotic world. The story of HAARP reveals an uncomfortable truth. Humans crave certainty, and when certainty isn't available, we create it. Sometimes with science, sometimes with myth. And once a myth is born, it takes on a life of its own, feeding on psychology, culture, and community. That is why, long after HAARP stopped most of its experiments, its legend continues to grow. Because in the end, the machine doesn't have to control the weather to be powerful. It already controls something far more human: our imagination. Every story needs an ending, and for HAARP, the ending is as layered as the myths surrounding it. Officially, the facility in Gakona, Alaska, slowed down in the mid-2010s. Funding dried up, the U.S. Air Force handed operations over to the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and the once-feared Doomsday machine became more of an academic curiosity than a military project. Public tours were even offered, letting people walk among the antennas that had fueled so much speculation. Yet, in many ways, the legend of HAARP is stronger now than ever before. The first part of HAARP's legacy is scientific. Researchers did learn valuable things from their experiments. By heating small sections of the ionosphere, they studied how charged particles move, how signals bounce, and how the atmosphere reacts to solar storms. This research has practical applications, from improving GPS accuracy to protecting satellites from space weather. In the world of science, HAARP's contributions are real, if modest. But in the world of public imagination, science was always the background, not the headline. The second part of HAARP's legacy is cultural. For decades, it has lived in the shadowy space between fact and fiction. It has been blamed for hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, and even mind control. It has appeared in novels, video games, and countless YouTube documentaries. To some, it is the ultimate symbol of government secrecy. To others, it is a case study in how conspiracy theories thrive in the digital age. Either way, HAARP became more than a research station. It became a character in a global story about trust, power, and fear. There's also a symbolic legacy. HAARP represents the uneasy relationship between science and the public. To scientists, it was a straightforward facility: antennas, transmitters, data collection. To the public, especially those who distrusted authority, it was a machine that could bend nature. The gap between those two views is enormous, and it reveals something about how humans process information. Cold facts don't always satisfy emotional fears. Numbers can be correct and still feel incomplete. That gap is where myths are born, and HAARP shows just how powerful those myths can be. On a broader scale, HAARP is a mirror for our times. We live in an era where technology advances faster than understanding, where governments guard secrets, and where disasters strike with growing frequency. In that mix, it's natural for people to search for hidden causes. HAARP became a stand-in for all the invisible forces shaping our world, a lightning rod for anxieties about power, control, and the fragility of the planet. Even after HAARP's main operations ended, its story didn't fade. Videos, blogs, and articles continue to spread theories about its hidden purpose. Each new hurricane, wildfire, or earthquake brings fresh claims. In that sense, HAARP has achieved a kind of immortality. Whether true or not, it remains part of the conversation whenever people look for explanations beyond nature. So what is HAARP's true legacy? It's not just in the antennas that still stand in Alaska, or in the scientific papers published by researchers. Its true legacy is in the questions it raised. Questions about science. How far can we push our knowledge of the skies? Questions about power. How much do governments reveal, and how much do they conceal? And questions about humanity. Why do we fear some technologies so deeply, even when evidence says they are harmless? In the end, HAARP may never escape its myth. For some, it will always be the machine that secretly shapes disasters. For others, it will always be a misunderstood piece of scientific infrastructure. But perhaps its greatest lesson is this: when mystery, fear, and secrecy combine, stories can become more powerful than facts. And sometimes, those stories last longer than the projects that inspired them. As the antennas in Alaska stand quietly against the sky, they no longer pulse with high-frequency energy. But in the minds of millions, HAARP still hums with hidden power. Its true impact isn't measured in watts or volts, but in the imagination it unleashed, an imagination that, like the storms it was accused of creating, shows no sign of ending.